Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. I really like doing lists, and I've been meaning to make top 10 films of the decade for a while now. And as I was putting it together, it occurred to me that I could actually make it into a series where basically each video would focus on a top 10 from a different decade. And so I decided to skip the silent era and start with the 40s and then slowly progress throughout the decades all the way to 2010s. So the 1940s was a decade largely defined by the Second World War, which brought a wave of disillusionment and pessimism into films. Post-war Italy was a good example, where we saw the rise of Italian neorealism with films such as Rome, Open City or Bicycle Thieves, stories focused on the struggle of the poor working class. Hollywood underwent a change of its own. The sweet, big-budget studio productions of the 30s like The Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind were suddenly replaced with films such as The Best Years of Our Lives, a return-from-home war drama full of realism and not a hint of fantasy. But perhaps the most decade-defining was the emergence of the film noir genre, which created a universe full of deceit and betrayal, sex and murder, and produced some of the greatest films of all time. But I'll get into more of that later. Here are my top 10 films of the 1940s. At number 10, The Great Dictator.
Start with the invasion of Austerlitz. After that, we won't have to fight, we can bluff. Nation after nation will capitulate. Within 2 years, the world will be under your thumb.
Leave me. I want to be alone.
The Great Dictator was Charlie Chaplin's first all-talking picture, and therefore, if you want to get into his filmography but perhaps are a bit intimidated by silent films, this might be a good place to start. I've seen this film a few years ago, and at the time it must have been the most approachable 40s film for me. Revisiting it now, after watching a lot more of 40s cinema, there's something about Chaplin and his screen presence that's just completely different than any other actor. There's this feel for movement and timing and expressions that just separates him and puts him in a league of his own. I feel kind of guilty having this at number 10, as it is a film that has aged remarkably well and belongs in the conversation for the greatest satire of all time. At number 9, Bicycle Thieves.
Al ladro! Al ladro! Che ti è successo?
Directed by Vittorio De Sica, Bicycle Thieves must be the most famous representation of Italian neorealism and often pops up in many greatest films of all time lists. It tells a simple story about a struggling working class man whose job is put in jeopardy once the bicycle he requires to perform it gets stolen. The film follows him and his son as they journey through a post-war, poverty-stricken Rome in search of the bicycle. It's a film with a simple but a powerful theme about the cycle of poverty, and it is a film that I plan to revisit in the future, as I feel it might get better with multiple viewings. Not because it's complicated to understand, but because there's this poetry and beauty in its simplicity. At number 8, Double Indemnity.
Evening around 8:30. He'll be in then.
Who?
My husband. You were anxious to talk to him, weren't you?
Yeah, I was, but I'm sort of getting over the idea, if you know what I mean.
There's a speed limit in this state, Mr. Neff. 45 miles an hour.
How fast was I going, officer?
I'd say around 90.
Suppose you get down off your motorcycle and give me a ticket.
Suppose I let you off with a warning this time.
Suppose it doesn't take.
Suppose I have to whack you over the knuckles.
Suppose I bust out crying and put my head on your shoulder.
Suppose you try putting it on my husband's shoulder.
That tears it.
One of the earlier film noirs, it features all the familiar noir themes. A man who succumbs to his desires and temptations, a dangerous femme fatale, and both of whom are after the thrill of committing a perfect murder and getting away with it. The film stands out with its clever plot, witty dialogue, and of course...
I love you too.
I prefer this film over The Lost Weekend, another Billy Wilder classic from the 40s. It's more entertaining, has almost a perfect pace, and it's a much easier film to digest.
They give you matches when you buy cigars, you know. All you have to do is ask for them.
Don't like them. They always explode in my pocket. So long, Walter.
At number 7, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Ten 1/10 of a ticket, senor, for 40 cents.
Directed by John Huston, A frequent collaborator with Humphrey Bogart, who really must be the actor who owned the 40s, with notable films such as The Maltese Falcon, The Big Sleep, Casablanca, and many others. But it is here that Humphrey gives his greatest performance, in my opinion. At a time when his career was certainly peaking, he decided rather bravely to play a despicable character, a man in search for gold who gets overrun with greed and lust for more, and eventually turns into something completely demonic. It just might be the best male performance of the 40s, in my opinion.
I gotta get hold of myself. I mustn't lose my head. There's one thing certain, he ain't here. I got it. The tiger. Yeah, that's it, the tiger. They dragged him off to his lair, that's what. Yeah, pretty soon, not even the bones will be left to tell the story. Done as if by order.
At number 6, Brief Encounter. Directed by David Lean, this is perhaps the smallest film on the entire list, a highlight of British cinema. This might be the film that I was most emotionally impacted by. It's about two people falling in love despite knowing that they can never be together, and it explores all the nuances and the pain of such a relationship. Its themes of unconsummated love and tragic romance are timeless, and it is a real gem that can be easily overlooked when exploring David Lean's epic filmography. Do not skip this film, it has beautiful performances with great dialogue, and it is masterfully directed. It might be the biggest surprise of the 40s cinema for me.
I know what you feel about this evening. I mean about the sordidness of it. I know about the strain of our different lives, our lives apart from each other. The feeling of guilt, of doing wrong, is too strong, isn't it? Too great a price to pay for the happiness we have together. I know all this because it's the same for me, too.
Now, before we dive into the top 5, which is basically the masterpiece territory, I'd like to give a few honorable mentions, films that I struggled to keep off the list, but maybe should have deserved to make it. The Maltese Falcon. Often regarded as the first major film noir, it was John Huston's directorial debut and one of Bogart's first big roles. The Maltese Falcon was a major hit and represented the first breakthrough for both of them. To this day, it is regarded as one of the all-time classics. The Rope. Perhaps my favorite of this bunch. The Rope uses many unique camera techniques and has multiple long takes that often lasted up to 10 minutes, which was very rare at the time. The film takes place in a single apartment and for most of its duration in a single room, to be honest. This allows Hitchcock's skill as a director to be seen in full display.
I'm not interested in Janet's prattle, but you always interest me, Rupert. Do you think I kidnapped David?
The Philadelphia Story.
And you a writer? I thought all writers drank to excess and beat their wives. You know, one time I think I secretly wanted to be a writer.
Dexter, would you mind doing something for me?
Anything, what?
Get the heck out of here.
Oh, my dear Red, I couldn't do that. That wouldn't be fair to you. You need me too much.
So, jumping into the top 5 films of 1940s. At number 5, we have The Third Man.
Are you a slow writer, Mr. Martin?
Not when I get interested.
I'd see you were doing something pretty dangerous this time.
Yeah?
Mixing fact and fiction.
Should I make it all fact?
Why, no, Mr. Martins. I'd say stick to fiction. Straight fiction.
I'm too far along with the book, Mr. Petesco.
Haven't you ever scrapped a book, Mr. Martins?
Never.
Pity.
If I were to describe this film as simply as possible, I would call it an atmospheric masterpiece. Directed by Carol Reed in 1949 and shot entirely on location in post-war Vienna, this might be the most visually stunning and epic film on this list, whose cinematography might only be topped by Citizen Kane. It is a film like this that cinemas were made for, and to me it seems that if the 40s were the decade where film noir became prominent, this film is where its elements have been utilized to perfection. With its use of looming shadows and the Dutch angle, Kyle Reed and cinematographer Robert Krasker have transformed Vienna into a mysterious maze and filled it with one of the best ensemble casts of the decade. This film is a feast for the eyes and ears, and it is a film that I plan on rewatching rewatching multiple times in the future, because I have a feeling it will only get better with repeated viewings. At number 4, Notorious.
Why don't you give that copper's brain of yours a rest? Every time you look at me, I can see it running over its slogans. Once a crook, always a crook. Once a tramp, always a tramp. Go on. You can hold my hand. I won't blackmail you for it afterwards. Scared?
I've always been scared of women, but I get over it.
And now you're scared of yourself. You're afraid you'll fall in love with me.
That wouldn't be hard.
Oh, now careful, careful.
You enjoy making fun of me, don't you?
For some reason, people leave this film out whenever they are discussing Hitchcock masterpieces. It always baffles me, as this might be my favorite Hitchcock film. It's certainly his best film of the 40s, and it is a masterclass in suspense like all his other classics. But what I love about this film is that it has this unique warmth and humanity to it, unlike any other Hitchcock film. I think it comes from a combination of great performances and a complex emotional love story at its core. Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman have incredible chemistry in this film, and they both bring a unique sensuality. The film is full of memorable shots and great sequences where Hitchcock masterfully builds up tension and constructs one of the few perfect endings in cinema history. At number 3, It's a Wonderful Life.
What'd you wish, George?
Well, not just one wish, a whole hatful. Mary, I know what I'm going to do tomorrow and the next day and next year and a year after that. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm going to see the world. Italy, Greece, the Parthenon, the Colosseum. Then I'm coming back here and go to college and see what they know. And then I'm going to build things. I'm going to build airfields. I'm going to build skyscrapers 100 stories high. I'm going to build bridges a mile long. Well, you going to throw a rock? Hey, that's pretty good. What'd you wish, Mary?
If I were to choose one film from this list that I think every human being should see at some point in their lives, I think it would be It's a Wonderful Life by Frank Capra. This is a film with a beautiful, heartfelt message that explores the meaning of existence as well as the importance of family and friendships. Its themes are timeless, and they are brought to life by performances by James Stewart and Donna Reed. I absolutely adore Donna Reed in this film. She's overflowing with this incredible energy of goodness and love, and whenever she appears on screen, she just shines. It's incredible. The film wasn't a hit when it first came out. In fact, it initially lost money, but it has since become an American Christmas classic, and I've decided to make it a tradition to see this film every Christmas from now on. At number 2, Casablanca.
Where is Rick?
I don't know. I ain't seen him all night.
When will he be back?
Not tonight no more. He ain't coming. He went home.
Does he always leave so early?
Oh, he never. Well, he's got a girl up to the Blue Parrot. Goes up there all the time.
You used to be a much better liar, Sam.
Leave him alone, Miss Elsa. You bad luck to him.
Play it once, Sam. For all time's sake.
I don't know what you mean, Miss Elsa.
Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by.
You must remember this.
Perhaps the most universally beloved film on this list, Casablanca was directed by Michael Curtiz, and it is the only film on this list that actually won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1942. While I was doing research and watching all the films in preparation for this video, I decided to leave Casablanca and Citizen Kane as the last two films that I would watch. I've seen both of them before, but I was curious to see if I would look at them in a different light, if I'll watch them after being attuned to the 1940s style of filmmaking. Since then, I've watched Casablanca 3 more times. What immediately jumps out is the dialogue and the pacing of the first act. It's got a fast pace and multiple things going on at once that's just unparalleled when compared to the other films. There's just so many great moments, so many quotable lines. It's definitely one of the most quotable movies of all time. But what makes this film stand out is its array of well-written characters. Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart are great, of course, and my personal favorite performance of Claude Rains as a womanizing police captain is hilarious. But it's the smaller roles in this film that make it come alive. The waiters, the immigrants, the hustlers, the head of the black market. These characters create a unique atmosphere because you feel like almost every single character that has a line in this film is a real person with a real backstory. And all of this is thanks to the brilliant writing. And then of course, there's just a few scenes in this film that just capture the magic of cinema and would make this film basically my favorite film on this list. Normally it would feel like a cop-out to put my favorite film from a decade anywhere but number 1 on a top 10 list. But there was one more film on the list to rewatch, and in this case it is the only film that's worthy of making this exception for, I think. And so, at number 1, Citizen Kane.
Well, I happened to see your financial statement today, Charles.
Oh, did you?
Now, tell me honestly, my boy, don't you think it's rather unwise to continue this philanthropic enterprise? This Inquirer that's costing you $1 million a year?
You're right, Mr. Thatcher. I did lose $1 million last year. I expect to lose $1 million this year. I expect to lose $1 million next year. You know, Mr. Thatcher, at the rate of $1 million a year, I'll have to close this place in 60 years.
I feel slightly intimidated and certainly unqualified trying to talk about this film. When I first saw it at the age of 20, I thought it was good, a solid 9 out of 10, but I didn't really see many reasons why it should be dubbed as this greatest film of all time. But seeing it now, especially when I was able to contrast it with other films from its era, it's incredible. In terms of utilization of cinema language and combining it with special effects, Citizen Kane was decades ahead of its contemporaries. It is a film whose cinematography easily rivals that of the 21st century masterpieces, a film in which every single shot has an idea behind it and can be analyzed endlessly. The story structure was incredibly innovative as well. The entire film is basically a collection of subjective flashbacks jumping across multiple timelines, something unheard of at the time and even years following it. And then of course there's Orson Welles, who somehow at age 25 managed to not only write and direct, but portray Kane throughout his life, all the way into his 70s. And he does this without ever hitting a false note. But as I said, I don't feel qualified talking about this film, having only seen it twice now. Instead, I'll leave you with some closure from Roger Ebert.
In 1939, Orson Welles, a child prodigy who had become a radio and theater star in New York, got one of the most amazing contracts ever offered by Hollywood, complete control over a motion picture to be made at RKO Radio Pictures. He would be able to write it, direct it, produce it, star in it, have the final cut. It would be released exactly as he wanted it to be released. And never before in Hollywood history had anyone since the silent days had quite so much control. Certainly somebody like Charlie Chaplin or D.W. Griffith would have had that kind of control, but not in what was then considered the modern era of sound motion pictures. Whenever I'm asked what the greatest film of all time is, I always say Citizen Kane. It's so inventive, so fresh, every time you see it, so new, I never get tired of it.